Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night. What is on? Is that on? Okay, was that on your side, Chris?
Don't think so.
Oh,
It's clearly
okay,
coming
we
from
should
the
be
different
okay
room.
now. I thought I had muted the site, and apparently I haven't. All right, let's try that again. Hello, everybody. I think that is okay. Chris, do a right click on the tab and select mute site. All right, are we ready? Okay, so all right. Hold on, everybody. Sorry for all of this. It's muted on my side. All right, are we good? I think we're good. Okay. No, we're not good. Where is this coming from?
Do you have two websites up?
In the same browser?
Right. So the sound. See, there's a delay, which means there's a different site up.
Okay. That is really weird because.
Now you'll hear.
No, I think I just fixed it.
Okay.
I've never seen it do that before. Okay. All right.
It's a new problem every week.
It's a new problem every week. This is show number 118, and we're still figuring out how to do this. All right, everybody. Hello, everybody. It's Saturday night at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Central, where I and Pat and Chris Carlson currently are, and this is Starfleet Tactical. Sorry about all that. I had muted the site, and it wasn't being muted on both windows I had open, and I don't know why it was doing that, but I'm using the external monitor that I don't usually use for this, so I think that had something to do with it. So I am clearly at Chris Carlson's place. I am not in his office because we decided that having three people clustered around Chris's computer didn't work as well as we would like it to. So I am out in the room outside of his office. I wish you all could see this setup because in order to get the lighting right, and this is as close to right as we could get in this room. In order to get the writing light, my laptop is actually sitting on top of three different science fiction game boxes, one of which we're going to talk about, and that's Star Trek Ascendancy, which we were playing until about 45 minutes ago. So first of all, Chris, Pat, how are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Not doing too badly for having lost two ships in the first move.
I can't hear you.
Okay, we are unmuted.
Still can't hear you. Rest of world, can you hear them? Okay, so I will keep on talking until they figure this out. It's not, and it's clearly not that the microphone is off. The mute site stuff shouldn't cause that to happen because that just means it doesn't play things out. So it's got to be something with the microphone setting or something like that. Hey, try again, guys.
You even tested it.
Yeah, I just tested it. And it worked until he dropped the site. So it is muted on his end. He's master muting us.
Ah, okay.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything on my side.
Yeah.
Okay. Other people are telling me that you're coming in just fine.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
You're welcome.
So apparently it's something on my end. You know what? I know how I'm going to solve this problem. All right. Say something, guys.
Got us?
Something.
Say something again.
Something.
Hello?
Boo.
All right. Yeah, I can hear them in the other room, but I can't hear them on my computer, and I don't know why. Okay. It's not that. All right. Try again.
Can you hear us?
Okay.
At least it's not my fault this time. That's the important thing.
Okay. I don't know what's going on here.
Well, why don't you start doing some of your presentation while Chris gets that figured out?
It's just
Okay.
one of
Speakers are
those-
selected. Speaker volume is turned all the way up. I've deselected and selected again. Mute is not on.
Did you hear us before? Yeah, the ding, Ross, was a text message
Okay.
that my computer's linked to my iPhone, and so it likes to ding when I get texts.
I have no idea what's going on here.
Well, tell him drop back phase 2 is he comes in here.
All right. Well, you know what? Since everybody else can.
I don't know, we all just.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Hold on just a second, everybody. We'll be right there.
Whatever you did to mute the site, I think muted us from you.
Yeah, shouldn't have done that. Okay. All right, everybody.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead and get started. I'll just
We'll hot seat. We'll hot seat. All right. Okay. So how are you guys doing?
I'm doing well.
downscope.
So I am clearly in Minnesota here. This is the first post-COVID trip that we've all been together. I'm trying to remember. I think I've seen you at some point.
Several times, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of times post-COVID.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time you and I have been in the same room post-COVID, isn't it?
No, it's the
No,
second.
No.
We came once before.
Yeah. Okay. And we saw each other down at the Cold Wars. So, but
And I saw him at Historicon.
okay.
Yeah, we were in Lancaster, Virginia together. So,
Okay, so I'm clearly having a hard time keeping score at home, as well as having a hard time with technology tonight, which is funny because I used to do tech support on Macintosh computers, and I have no idea what's going on with this because all the volume settings are correct. That's the baffling part. All the volume settings are correct.
Similar
think-
problem to what I was having last week.
Yeah, except you have a Windows box, so who knows what.
and
you're
who knows what random
well,
shit
no,
it's
and
doing.
your computer always has random shit like that.
I did buy a new camera, so we'll
So,
see.
All right, so I'm not sure
I
exactly.
either bought a new problem or a solution. We'll see.
Well, it could be both.
Mm.
Could be both. So in any event,
Time will tell.
Pat and Chris and I we're going to talk about a couple of things tonight. One, we're going to talk about Star Trek Ascendancy, which is a game that we were playing that we all. Chris had never played before. I've only played a couple of times. And we didn't play it to conclusion. We only played about 3 turns. And then we're going to talk a little bit about fire control, because we've been having a conversation about fire control in various science fiction universes and stuff like that. And then Pat's got a few thoughts about Battlestar Galactica that we did not cover last week. And so we may or may not get to those tonight, depending upon what other disasters befall us along the way. This is not, incidentally, the worst technical problem we've ever had. The worst technical problem is that we absolutely I was on by myself, and we absolutely positively had absolutely no video, right? We couldn't get the screen to go away. It just always showed the screen. And after I called the show, we played with that for about 10 minutes, couldn't get it to work. Afterwards, I sent a quick message to StreamYard tech support, and we solved it in 15 seconds. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Get help.
yes. So,
That being their job, it's possible they've dealt with this before.
yeah. And when they said it, it's like, yes, of course, that's what it is. Because with streaming,
It was is it plugged in kind of a solution?
it was close. It was close.
One notch above
So
that.
the problem is the way Alec had all this set up is that there's some of the banners and some of the overlays, or some of the backgrounds and some of the overlays are the exact same picture.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was a background picture. It wasn't. It was an overlay picture. So my camera was working just fine. There was just an overlay on top of me.
Oh, good.
And so that didn't
All
work.
right.
So in any event, let's talk a little bit about Star Trek Ascendancy. So
Sure.
for those who haven't played before, it is a Star Trek 4X game. And I always describe it as it's got a lot of Star Trek flavor. There's a few things where it's not quite Star Trek, but I think overall it seems to work relatively well.
Yeah, I like it. Fun, simple game.
He liked it enough that he's spent $3,000 on all the different parts of the game.
Yeah, with current inflation, who knows?
He's got all the expansion.
I've had it for a long time. So
yeah, it's not $3,000, but it does have plenty of expansions and this and that and the other things. So he's got a lot of the stuff.
It's put out by Gale Force 9, if anybody's interested. But it's a 4X game. It's fairly easy game to pick up, pretty easy to play. I actually think it's one of the best of the 4X, what was it? Expand, explore, expand, exterminate,
exploit and exterminate.
Exploit and exterminate. That's what they mean by 4X. You build your big space empire kind of a game. I enjoy it, I think, more than most of the other games of that type that I've played, because it's fairly streamlined. It's pretty simple, but you still have to plan and scheme and plot and negotiate with other people and stuff like that. But the big thing is that it incentivizes you to actually do things. Like the Klingons, if they're going to win, they have to act like Klingons and they have to attack people and win battles. For the Federation, they have to be out exploring for them to use their advantages. And then I think the Romulans are just kind of sit and hide from everybody and build technology and stuff like that. But the point is it incentivizes each empire, and they've got Cardassians, Ferengi, Andorian, Vulcan. There's a Dominion War expansion. There's a Borg expansion. And the Dominion War expansion includes the Brain.
Did you say Vulcans and Andorians?
I did say
Yes.
Vulcans and Andorians, yeah. So anyways, point is, fun game. Gale Force 9, I don't know, I think it's about $100 probably to get the base set, which comes with the Federation, Klingons, and Romulans. And then from there, you can buy whichever expansions you like if you're interested in the game. But it's good, fun game. Plays real well with 3 people. I think it's 1 to 2 hours per person that's playing. So you can. Here's what it's not. It's not Axis and Allies, which I believe a game of that takes about 12 to 14 hours in my experience. And it's not like some of the others. And when I say it incentivizes you to do things, what I mean by that is that there are a lot of those games where you just try to quietly build your empire and don't contact anybody, and everybody's just individually doing that. And nothing happens for about 12 hours until the last turn, when everybody does the math and realizes who they have to slaughter to make sure that that person doesn't win. And then one person quietly ends up winning somehow. And so the ascendancy, like I said, it incentivizes players in order to win, to actually do things, whatever it is their empire does.
Eclipse, for instance, is a game where you just sort of do your own thing for a long time.
It's basically a solitary game while chatting with other people until the last turn.
And then the knives come out.
But then it just comes down to, somebody who analyzes it, does the thing, and the last turn takes like 4 hours because everybody is very carefully weighing how many victory points they're going to get with every action that they take and stuff like that. And it's, I don't know. So up to that point, I really enjoyed Eclipse. But
the thing about Ascendancy that makes it sort of unique is that it's a build the board game, except instead of picking tiles and sort of figuring out which hex side you're going to put the tile on, you're putting planetary systems down on the map, and you're connecting them with connector pieces that represent the warp lanes going from point A to point B. And I did not fully appreciate it when I watched other people playing it, that there's this entire separate Go-like game of trying to box the other guy in by where you're putting your stuff down, because there are rules about where you can and can't connect. And so there's the game of sort of like managing your empire and deciding what nodes you're going to promote. Like, do I want to do more research, or do I want to do culture stuff, etc. There's that piece of it. But then there's this other one where you're sort of fighting for territory by where you put the pieces of cardboard. And that, I think, makes the game a lot different than Twilight Imperium or Eclipse or any of those other ones where you're sort of just flipping tiles over.
Yeah, and that was the thing. I mean, Twilight Imperium was also kind of, you need to have 5 other people who have nothing else to do for 13 or 14 hours. And I don't know about you guys, but at this stage in life, that just doesn't happen anymore.
It'd probably be a good game to play in prison. Just like the rumor is that the only people that ever played Campaign for North Africa, the entire scenario folded all the way to conclusion, was a couple of guys who were in prison.
Oh yeah.
Supposedly. I need to ask Mark Herman if that story is true next time I see Mark.
I've done War in Europe.
Oh, I've done War in Europe too. In fact,
that takes a week.
well, I was playing with a group that played War in Europe once a month. And at some point, I think I turned to Sean Barnett and said, "How long is this going to take?"
5 years.
And we'd been playing for over a year. We were somewhere in early 1942, right? Like March of 42. And we did the math and we realized, okay, you can get in 2 turns per session. We played once a month, and each session was 2 weeks long. And oh my God, we're playing World War II in real time. At which point we all simultaneously failed our morale rolls. And like we were in the middle of the planning phase, and we sort of went, we're packing up, right? We're packing up. Yeah, we're packing up. We packed up. So what do you think of the game, Chris?
Well, I didn't like all the crises cards because I wasn't doing well with the die rolls.
He had a hard time in the planetary exploration phase.
Yeah, but you were the Federation. It happens to them.
3 cruisers right at the bat.
The opening scene is where all the bad stuff happens, and they've got to dig themselves out of the hole. So
I was in a hole.
And I'm not terribly sympathetic after you brutally defended yourself against my attack. Yeah.
Are you expecting me to apologize?
So I forced some combat.
Very well, apology accepted.
Yeah. I forced some combat because we knew we had to sort of pack up, because that's the same table that my computer is set up on, and it's currently broadcasting to an empty room because I'm in the office. I'm really baffled by what happened there. We should
Don't
figure
worry,
that out.
you'll figure it out when you go to sleep.
Yeah, I'll wake up at 2:00 in the morning and figure out what was going on. But
That's
it was very confusing. Okay, so any final thoughts on Ascendancy?
No, nice game.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that there's a tabletop simulator module for it. It does not enforce the rules because Tabletop Simulator doesn't enforce the rules. It's just basically all the components, and it'll automatically do math for you, so it'll add up the things that it's supposed to add up. And so I can't help but look at that and go, like I can use that to design another game. I can write an entire different set of rules as long as I've used these components. I'm good.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm going to get right on that right after the Immortality Sermon is perfected.
Exactly.
So
Or you can get a clone. I'm okay either way.
either way works.
Yeah.
Either way works. So let's talk a little bit about fire control and stuff like that. We were talking about how fire control in the Star Trek universe really seems to be just fire at that thing. They either can't get a lock at all, or it's automatic and they just shoot it. Does the real world work like that, Chris?
Only in novels.
Only in some novels.
Only in some novels.
Only in some novels.
Yeah.
Well, that's hardly the real world.
That's hardly the real world.
So what's a more likely process for that to work?
When you look at fire control, what you're really trying to do is figure out where the guy you intend to shoot, where is he going to be in the future? When you detect him, that just tells you he's there. And depending whether or not you got a passive sensor or an active sensor, all you may have is a bearing or a bearing in a range. Believe it or not, you can't shoot on that. Well, you can shoot, but you're probably going to miss. So what you do is you start tracking, which is you're monitoring his performance, his direction of motion, and you're getting a buildup of history. So this is all past tense. The whole thing about targeting is taking that history and projecting it into a future position so you can put your ordnance at the same place at the same time. That's what targeting is all about, and that's what fire controls are supposed to do.
And what Chris just described is a kill chain. And so different, I've talked about kill chains previously, not for a while. Kill chains vary depending upon what sort of systems that you're dealing with. Kill chains are really sort of dependent upon the warfare area and how you conduct combat in that warfare area. Those answers change over time. Like, for instance, the anti-submarine warfare kill chain specifically has a localized step in it. And that's because a lot of the sensors will tell you that there's something in that general direction, but that's not good enough to put a weapon on it. Because as a general rule, the weapons are relatively short-ranged. It's a relative term. It's hard to spot things. So it's hard weapon placement is very, very important. There's a lot of instances where you see the stuff printed on slick paper from the manufacturer about a given weapon system, and you look at it and you go, yeah, I don't believe any of this. And the reason why I don't believe it is that it's assuming perfect weapon placement. And I know from empirical results that maybe you get perfect weapon placement 60% of the time, maybe 40% of the time. And so right off the bat, there's close to a 50% chance you're going to miss just because you're not putting the weapon in exactly the right place. This is one of the reasons why I am a big fan of magnetic anomaly detection, because MAD is such a short-range sensor that if you get a hit, it's really a localization sensor. It's not really a detection sensor. If you can get a hit on MAD, you know that you're just put the weapon right there because you're right on top of the enemy submarine if you're getting a hit on MAD. MAD works by the hull of the submarine involved, as long as it's something that distorts a magnetic field, distorts the magnetic field of the Earth, and you can detect how that magnetic field is changing, and you can go, yeah, big iron thing right there, and drop a weapon on it. I have seen a detection on MAD.
Mm-hmm.
Not a localization, an actual detection. A P3 was flying out to the exercise area, and they flipped on their mad gear just to see if it was working, and they got a hit. And so they went, okay, and banked around and came back and prosecuted the hit and called into the carrier where I was and said, hey, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, could this be real? Could this be what we're looking for? And yeah, that could be it.
The unluckiest submarine crew ever.
Yeah, they really were. They really were. Which actually goes to something else, which is there's an identification step in there that I don't think you mentioned. Did you mention ID? If you did, you said it fast.
I didn't say anything about classification.
Classification is a big deal in this regard because, especially like in the real world, and especially with submarines, other people have submarines, and you don't necessarily, you usually don't want to shoot. You only want to shoot the target you're trying to shoot, right?
And the other team.
You don't want to shoot somebody who just happened to be in the neighborhood and got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And also, if you haven't done the classification step, you don't know that you're actually shooting at any target, right? Maybe you're shooting at something like, maybe you're shooting at a wreck, maybe you're shooting at an anomaly, maybe you're shooting at a whale.
If you look at the Falklands, about 90% of the ordnance was ultimately dropped on what was post-attack claimed to be a non-sub.
Yeah,
they ran out of ASW torpedoes, didn't
they? They went through Mark 46s pretty fast.
Yeah, and so they were just dropping them left and right. So, and that can happen if you're, but and the other thing is that if you've got the sort of data that you can use to ID something, you can tell exactly what it is you're dealing with. I mean, it's not just that you're classifying it as a submarine; it's that you should be able to get a much better idea behind that. Through, if you're dealing with submarines in particular, you can do it through tonals, through the specific frequencies that you're seeing on narrowband sonar. You can do it. There's all sorts of other techniques that you can use for like airplanes to figure out whether it's actually an air target and what exactly type of target it is. There's all sorts of funky stuff you can do. That's the other thing, is that in Star Trek they seem to be able to identify that stuff pretty fast. You don't really ever see anything like that in.
So there is the episode with the Phoenix where they appear to identify ships actually by some transponder signal. Like they can identify their own ships by transponder signal. But remember when they're looking for the Phoenix, which had kind of gone rogue and ran into Cardassian territory and was running silent, and I think Data said it takes them a full day to scan a sector. So that's a 20 by 20 light year area. And then at some point, doing long range scans, the Enterprise was able to identify that these were freighters or something like that. And the Cardassian who was on board, I believe, was astounded that they could make that identification at this range. And Picard's answer was, well, we are capable of making that. And so they clearly had better classification.
We don't suck like you guys do.
Yeah. They clearly had better classification capabilities. I don't know if they could just read the coded Cardassian transponder. I don't know the mechanism by which that happened, or if they send out a subspace sensor ping and it comes back and goes, oh yeah, here's what it looks like, here's how it's shaped, and someone identifies it or the computer identifies it. I don't know the mechanism by which it was done, but they were able to make that determination at this time. So, and from that distance. So so that would be one example where they're actually looking for a non-cloaked vessel that didn't want to be found, and it was clearly a difficult task, but they had a huge volume of space that they were searching.
Yeah, and just thinking about the phenomenologies involved in such a search, I always have kind of wished that Star Trek they had done a little bit more thinking early on about how they wanted their sensors to work about in such situations.
Sure, but
I mean, I could easily see a situation where you saw this in David Gerald's Yesterday's Children, which was nowadays, if you go and you find it, it's called Star Hunt, but it was originally Yesterday's Children. It's an interesting book in that there's two different editions of the book. The first edition is only 2/3 the length of the second edition because everybody was so annoyed with the ending of the first edition that and told him that he finally said, all right, I'll change the ending. And he just added another third of the book. He just added 50% more to the book.
So get the second edition.
So in the what had been the ending in the first edition happens about 2/3 of the way through the second edition. And he had originally pitched this as a Star Trek story, and Roddenberry didn't bite, and so he wrote it up as a novel. And in that novel, the Federation ships, you could easily detect drive phenomenology. So if somebody was under warp, you could detect them pretty easily. But if they dropped out of warp, they're just gone. Okay. And that always resonated with me. That makes sense as to how that would work.
Yeah.
And the other thing
the
is
difference between going 40 knots and slowing down to 5 knots.
Yes.
Okay.
And they could also they could read stuff from the engines.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
but at least you have narrowed them down, because once they're out of warp, or whatever their FTL capability, they're not going very far. They can't get far on foot at that point.
the other thing is that you had to be out of warp to drop a weapon, even though I think the missiles actually then immediately climbed back into warp.
Okay.
If I remember that part correctly. It's an interesting book. It's an interesting book.
Okay. Yeah.
And I've been meaning to talk with David about it. I didn't get a chance to talk with him the last time I was on I sometimes do technical stuff for a book club a writer's club that will occasionally have people come in and interview them. Okay. It was another one of my other big COVID project. I've got 3 COVID projects, and it's one of the 3 that I started doing. And so I saw him not too long ago, but didn't get a chance to ask him about it. Let's see. What else about fire control? I mean, we talked about weapons system stuff also, which isn't quite fire control, but I think that's especially relevant from a science fiction standpoint because of what we see.
Because it all depends on whether or not it's a blind weapon, i.e., it doesn't have any seeker capability.
Yeah.
Or it has some sort of seeker in it. If it's blind, if it's literally nothing more but a straight running torpedo, your fire control requirements are actually much higher.
Yeah.
You've got to have a much tighter idea of where he's going to be, and then assuming he doesn't change. Mm-hmm. If you have a seeker weapon, you can be a little sloppy.
Go get him, boy.
You can do it.
Go get him.
It's got a sensor in the front. It's got a certain degree of field of view, and it can look so far. That really improves your ability to put weapons on the target very quickly. Again, it makes your placement easier.
Yeah.
And
it increases your ability to put the weapon on a target.
Yes.
Sometimes that target might even be the one that you're shooting, that you'd like to shoot at. As you knew Neil Byrne, right?
Yes.
As Neil Byrne used to say, when the harpoon goes into the mailbox, the address is to whom it may concern.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I would say with space combat is being close to each other usually isn't a really big deal. I mean, the only time you really see them stacked up on top of each other is Starship Trooper.
Yeah, and
collision hazards,
which we saw that.
And the thing is, so I am not a fan of that movie. The book is one of my favorite books of all time. I'm not a fan of that movie. I can tell a story more in the context of the book than how they did it in the movie. I can tell a story that makes all that make sense. Not the super close collision, super close formation, but how that collision happened.
Mhm.
In my head, what was going on is somebody was basically proposing something that looks a lot like ship to objective maneuver, which is an old Marine Corps term from about 15 years ago. Except in this case, what they were trying to do is they're trying to come out of warp or come out of Cherenkov Drive right into orbit and do their drop. And so rather than, like the way I sort of have it in my head, the way those drops normally worked is that you came into orbit and you had to sort of dress your orbit properly to line everything up. And then you could drop your capsules. And all that stuff takes time, and all that stuff gives the defenders time to prepare, and et cetera, and the defenders time to shoot at you. And so their thought was, we'll come out of warp basically in formation.
Well, they don't have formation jump capabilities like they do in Battlestar Galactica.
Yes, and
we'll get to that in a minute.
And the end result of that is they pulled off a maneuver that was a little bit more than the capabilities that they were capable of executing on, and they ended up with some ship collisions as a result.
Yeah. The other thing that's a little different with Star Trek is, at least with the phasers, they can shoot specific spots on an enemy ship, targeting weapons, targeting engines, stuff like that. So,
which is hard.
True. And there's even one battle where Worf looks at Sisko and says, yeah, restricting fire to weapons and engines is not proving to be effective. And Sisko in good fashion says, well, then let them have it.
No, I was thinking in the real world that's hard.
Yeah.
Some of it depends upon your sensor phenomenology, right? If you're using a radar guided missile, early generation radar guided missiles had a tendency to aim for the bright spot.
Mm-hmm. Radar guided missile?
Yeah.
Or heat seekers?
Well, heat seekers, both.
Right.
I mean, you go to where the biggest radar return was.
Sure. Which is usually the fuselage.
Yeah. So they had a tendency to aim for center of mass.
Yeah.
And so, anytime I see somebody using, I'm actually making some comments on our friend's book about this. Anytime I see somebody using missiles and doing called shots, I get really skeptical about that. I get really skeptical about that.
The only way technically you could kind of do that is if you had an imaging sensor. That would be like imaging infrared.
Yeah.
Or millimeter wave radar, where you could actually put it into a certain location, not necessarily, you may not hit exactly what you want, but you can get closer to it because you can figure out where along the ship's hull, in this particular case, you'd like the impact to occur.
But, and this is the thing that I need to have the conversation with my friend about in his book. So for things like ships, if you're firing an anti-ship weapon against something, you're picking the spot where you're maximizing the damage, or you're using it to reject decoys, right? You're not using it because I want to minimize damage.
No.
Because if you're firing an anti-ship weapon, what's the warhead size on a harpoon? It's like 100 kilograms, something like that.
125.
125 is it kilograms or pounds?
That's kilograms.
Yeah. Okay. Exocet's approximately the same class. I think Exocet's a little
amount
bigger,
of,
if I remember.
That's the amount of explosive. I think the actual warhead weight's closer to 250.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it'll leave a mark, right? And so you're not doing like, well, I want to take down his shields, but I don't want to damage the habitability of the ship, right? I don't want to take out his life support. No, you're optimizing where you're putting the very big hole, right? You don't use imaging infrared to limit damage. You use imaging infrared to reject decoys and to maximize damage. And so I get really leery anytime anybody says, oh, I'm just going to plink with the missile. For anti-ship missiles, I mean, The world changes when you've got like helicopters firing light missiles. Like if you're firing Hellfire, right? There's that derivative of Hellfire that just has swords. Have you heard about this thing? Oh yeah, it's a derivative of Hellfire that just has these giant blades that plop out.
No
And so
you're
explosives.
not joking?
I'm not joking.
No explosive.
It's no explosive. It's like literally
It's a
like
kinetic round.
18-inch long swords that pop out of each side. And so you're looking at me going, why on earth would you have one of these things?
Well, I'm sure there's a reason.
And the answer is maybe I want to shoot the very, very bad guy and I don't want to kill any of the people around them, or I want to minimize the amount of damage. There have been instances where they fired. I remember reading this in the newspaper. They fired at somebody who was driving a car and his passenger lived.
Wow.
Now,
Probably a little messy, but
Yeah, probably needed lots
we're
and lots of
shooting-
therapy.
We're shooting swords at people. We're
Yeah.
mounting swords on missiles.
well, it's also the benefit of laser guidance where you're,
yeah,
where your miss distance is 1 to 3 meters.
yeah. Which, okay. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, relatively small, but if you're sitting next to the person, yeah.
Or the other option that you have is there's a data link to the weapon. So it feeds you back what you're seeing. Remember during Desert Storm that, poor unfortunate Iraqi, life just sucks. He went into a door, into a building, shut the door, and the guy with the slam puts the optical seeker on the door.
Mm.
And he flew the missile into the door.
Yeah.
So, that's where you can get that kind of placement. But note, it's a human in the loop.
I've seen some footage from that from 2003 that involved a guy running away from a truck and a voice saying very clearly, "Follow the guy." And I've never seen a 500-pound bomb used as a sniper weapon before, but that was interesting. Let's see. There was something else I was going to say about that human in the loop and all the rest of it. It's really amazing. I mean, one of the recurring themes I see in Star Trek is that they're able to do amazing things with both the precision of their fire and their sensors when they're encountering somebody that they've never met before. We don't see that, right? I mean, we know who, when the U.S. Navy deploys, we know who the bad guys are. We know what their capabilities are. Every now and then you can get surprised. Somebody comes out with something new. I mean, we've surprised people a couple of times with the sword missile. Surprised some people. We surprised some people with the TLAM, the Tomahawk variant that was designed to take down power grids. I don't think anybody in the outside had heard about that beforehand. I certainly hadn't. I was in grad school at the time, or just right out of grad school, and hadn't heard anything about that. And I had spent a lot of time studying TLAM. There was nothing in the unclassified literature about that. Those sorts of things are relatively rare and relatively at the margins. And but in Star Trek, they're constantly encountering new species they've never encountered before, and they just sort of do a quick scan. And it's like, oh yeah, that little widget right there, that's the thing we need to. If we push that little button, the entire ship will just sort of fly apart. Or
Well, I mean, when they in the episode Arena, when they encounter the Gorn ship, their weapons had no particular useful effect against the Gorn ship and stuff like that. So
I was thinking more next gen, but yeah.
So they weren't really prepared to fight the Gorn, and we don't get any details on why, but I know Kirk orders and Sulu to fire. Sulu fires. Hey, no real effect, but it could be just the torpedoes missed or something like that. No big deal. But
Actually, I think that's one of the things that we need to point out that Star Trek gets right, and that is the further away the target is, they have a lower chance of hit, and we do see that, and that's very true.
Yeah.
If you want to maximize your probability of hit, you want to get as close as you can without getting too close. And that's more of
Yeah.
a tactical decision.
Find a range that's to your advantage.
And historically, we've seen that one more time in English, lead to some interesting ship design decisions. I'm thinking specifically of the fact that a couple of things. The guns that equipped the Royal Navy ships for World War I were largely the same guns that had been on the previous generation of ships. It's the real big difference was fire control and all the things that went along with it, right? It's not that they suddenly got a gun that could shoot a lot farther. It's that they now were at the point where they could hit a lot farther. And so it was essentially the same gun. And then you saw that, you know, turn the crank one more time, you see that immediately post World War I, where fire control had gotten good enough that the limitation was the ability to raise the gun. The turrets were not designed to let the gun raise to maximum elevation, because why on earth would you want to be able to shoot out that far? You can't hit anything out there. Well, then they developed the ability to hit at range, and that first set of modifications that were made after World War I was basically making the turrets so that you could raise the gun farther so you could shoot farther. Maximum range was not determined by the range of the gun. It was the range of the fire control, and the range, and as a result, the turrets sort of depressed the trajectory.
And you see that a lot in pre-Dreadnought discussions. When I was working on the design for Dawn of the Battleship, one of the things we kept telling players is you got to get closer. And the guy would say, my gun will shoot 15,000 yards. I'm going, yes, it can physically throw a shell 15,000 yards, but it will be nowhere near where you want it to be.
Right.
So you start having them look at it, and historically you start seeing, wait a minute, really good effective ranges is like 5,000 yards because there is no fire control. You're trying to adjust to his movement by manually training your barrels.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other problem, and I believe they solved this, right? But if I've got my 5 or 6 ships in my column, in a column shooting at somebody, how do I know? And you know, the idea is you fire a shell and you see if it's short or if it went long or a little left and right. But if me and all my buddies are shooting at a ship, how do I know which shell is my splash so that I can adjust my fire? How did they solve that?
Well, in World War I, it was almost always engage your opposite number.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you were second in line, you're supposed to go after the second guy in their line.
Mm-hmm.
Over concentration, as they call it, which confuses you, particularly at longer range. They tried a number of different ways to do it. The U.S. Navy did several exercises, as did the Royal Navy. And by the late 1920s, we came to the conclusion that 2 ships next to each other in formation could coordinate and fire on the same target. But any more than 2, you lose the coordination. And the 2 ships have to be near each other. The other option people tried were die shells.
Yeah, I've heard of that. How well did that work?
Not well.
Not well. Okay, good. All right.
Well, so the die shell was really, really effective at proving that it was a blue on blue at what was it, First Guadalcanal?
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
so I'm just going to throw this out. I'm just totally making this up. So if we assume that in Star Trek, most of the combat actually happens in beyond visual range, you know, right? Space is big. These ships are going 25% the speed of light at maximum impulse. So at 75,000 kilometers per second, you're probably not doing a visual dogfight, right? so we'll just make a couple basic assumptions. They're not in visual range. That's simply the Hollywood getting it wrong. while you know,
And doubling down on the remaster.
that's right, and doubling down, right? So if we assume that, you know, a starship out there is nothing but a teeny tiny little speck, then and perhaps all of these weapons are really high-powered weapons, right? You know, phasers, photon torpedoes, 50 megaton explosions or something like that when they hit something or when they're out flying. But these are really high-powered weapons. Would that cause any distortion with the sensors to where, hey, maybe it is difficult even in Star Trek for 5 or 6 ships to concentrate all their fire on one guy because maybe there are sensor distortions? Because what do we see in the shows? We don't see, you know, 4 ships coordinating, blow up that guy because, you know, 5 or 6 ships firing volleys of torpedoes can kill him. Then you can kill him. Then you can kill him. Nope, they're all sort of flying around and they're taking pot shots at whoever's closest. But rarely are they doing concentrated fire on one ship, which if you play a lot of the different Starship combat games, right, sort of the basic tactic is, hey, I've got my 3 or 4 ships. We'll concentrate all your fire on one guy, eliminate or mission kill that guy, and then move on to the next. But maybe, based on what we see in Star Trek, that problem's a little bit harder in Star Trek in that you can't see, maybe it's some Star Trek equivalent of Gunsmoke.
Yeah.
Or not being able to tell where your splashes are landing, so to speak.
That's kind of the problem I have with Star Trek overall, is that the sensor fire control issue is almost assumed.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just get to the shooting part and the explosions because that's what entertains.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is that as a general rule, starships in that universe don't miss. They miss some, right? But I mean, you like if you're dealing with a battleship fight in the real world, if you're hitting at 10%, you're doing phenomenal, right? If you're in Star Trek, if you're hitting at 90%, why are you missing those remaining 10%?
Yeah, but you know, you've got essentially beams traveling at light speed, and that actually is nearly a torpedo problem at those distances and the speeds they're traveling, right? But then you got photon torpedoes, which are seeker weapons. They do adjust and track and stuff. So they've got that going for them.
No. I mean, I understand what it is. It's basically, I'm saying there are places where that analogy breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because in Star Trek, you don't kill things by hit. You have to hit them multiple times, right?
Yeah.
It's not the equivalent of like, I just keep firing and I hope I get a hit. And then eventually I'll get, you know,
right. A modern warship hit by an anti-ship missile is probably, it may not sink, but it's probably not really combat capable anymore.
And that's where I think the Honor Harrington stuff is a little bit more realistic. If you just, in terms of modern day naval, if you will, in that they do concentrate fire. Mm-hmm. And you have missiles going wherever they would like. Oh, that moon looks lovely.
Yeah.
You have electronic warfare. You have decoys. You have counter missiles, point defenses. And the further away you are, the crappier your shooting solution is. Mm-hmm. But we're talking huge salvos.
Yeah.
So, you know, where 5% hits, you know, with 1,000 missiles. Okay, you know, that's an appreciable number of hits.
Yeah, that'll leave a mark.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep. Plus the fact that all of them are MIRVed anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. Ships are much more survivable in Star Trek. It's, you know, the joke if you make a World War II analogy, Star Trek is probably closer to World War II bombers fighting each other.
Yeah.
Than
ships
fighting each other in World War II. You know, you can find pieces of similarities to both, but
yeah, one thing I think a lot of people lose lock on is,
pardon the pun,
is what's the dependent and what's the independent variable when you're talking about gunfire.
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the beginning of the Dreadnought era, and you've got a hit rate of like 3 to 6%, and if you look at the end of the World War One, look at the end of the Dreadnought era, World War II, you've got a hit rate of about 3 to 6. Changed, right? It didn't get any better, except the range. For that, if you go back to the pre-dreadnoughts, right, that about 3 to 6%, more or less, right, right around that area. But the thing is, by the time you go from pre-dreadnoughts to World War II era ships, the range doubled, and it doubled again, and then doubled again. And so people don't understand what's a dependent and the independent variable in that equation. You weren't solving for hit rate, you were solving for range, right? Modern naval planners, or the naval planners of the day, the tacticians of the day, were happy with a 3 to 6% hit rate, and they ended up fighting at whatever range could get them that. Now, does that mean that everybody just stayed at that range? No, but that's the range at which you'd start shooting, because that would work.
So the similarity, though, is that two Navy vessels shooting at each other have to sit there, and they've got to fire off a lot of ordnance in order to actually score hits and kill somebody. Just like in Star Trek, lots of hits, not very much damage, but everyone's got to do a lot of shooting to kill the other person too.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, it's like, how many times do I have to? How many rounds do I have to fire? Yeah. How many times do I have to fire the gun?
World War I ships and II ships actually had shields. That's what's causing the misses. They're bouncing off, right? If we were doing the Star Trek analogy.
Yes, they've got shields. It's called air.
Air. That's right. All those particles getting in the way.
Yeah. So.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see. You had made a comment about there was some Battlestar Galactica stuff, follow-up stuff.
Oh, you want to switch gears?
Well, we could switch gears. We're at 9:57.
Right. So
if we were going to do it, we should do that. You want to do
that later? Yeah, we could do that at another time then. Since we're pretty much at our time at this point.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, so any other thoughts about fire control?
Don't shoot without it.
I do want to talk a little bit about weapon system stuff. I started down that path, and then we didn't end up going down that path. I've always wondered the question, what exactly is Worf doing, right? So he's standing back there behind Picard, and he's doing stuff on the panel. He's clearly not using a joystick to put a reticle on something, right? He's clearly doing something.
It's a touch screen.
He's doing something, but he's doing something where he's giving orders to the computer. What orders is he giving to the computer?
So, well, the next generation technical manual would be good, but I think in a lot of cases, what you're doing is you're probably even setting up parameters by which, because again, in reality, at those speeds, human reflexes are useless, right? If you're doing a head-on pass with somebody at 150, you're going to set that computer up. Fire at this range.
Remember Kirk standing over Sulu's shoulder going, okay, now
fire. Right. And the Klingons attacking them at warp 7 or something like that, which is 7 times 7 times 7. So, which is a lot of speed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're not, and combat was at visual ranges, right? So,
it wasn't in the original show.
In the original show, it was,
No, most of the time it wasn't. Most of the time.
No, no. I know what you mean. In Balance of Terror, they really got that right. You see the Enterprise shooting, and then in the distance, you see the little explosions from their proximity. So that's a thumbs up.
In other ones, you'd see one ship fires phasers. You'd see the phasers hit. You'd see them fire. You'd see them hit.
Yeah. So
and now that was it. The ironic thing about that is I think that actually was more quote unquote realistic. I think that made sense more. And that was entirely because they didn't have the equipment and the techniques of the day to do the two ships in the same shot.
Yeah.
By the time Next Gen rolled around, they could have both models in the same shot.
They were always parked like this. Like, what a terrible idea. Two opposing battleships just parking like this with broadsides pointed at each other. So,
which didn't stop Lucas from doing it in Star Wars.
Well, I mean,
Again, that was entertainment.
Yeah.
And having people far apart where you can't see them and you can't see the effect of fire is not entertaining.
well, actually,
but you
there
can't
was-
see the infected fire,
well,
and
the-
we see
well, wait a
we
minute.
see people do it. We
the
see
movie, Battleship Yamato, what was that?
Starblazer.
Starblazer. Well, whatever. But the point is they did a live action movie
yes,
of the space battleship. Yeah. And in that one, they did it really well. Like, it was clear that they were fighting from really far distances apart. The gun would fire, and then you'd kind of like see the high speed, I don't know, follow the laser beam kind of, and you could tell it was going really far, and then it arrives and hits the target and stuff. And they were doing stuff like that. It was pretty good. So I thought they did that well. I thought they did that one really well in that.
Although their fighters still were flying in the air.
Well, of course. I mean, yeah.
I mean, I like what they did in Andromeda in that regard, where you usually had, one ship fire and the other ship fired, and then they cut to the radar screen and they watch the salvos
missiles come in,
interpenetrate
yeah.
and go by, and then
Yeah.
you'd start seeing point defenses. They go back and forth, and you'd see point defenses go off and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I thought that actually worked relatively well.
No, there's something to be said for, long range missiles in space. I mean, what David Weber did with Honor Harrington really does make a lot of sense if you just extrapolate, on out.
We were talking about that earlier while we were playing the game, about how David sort of set things up as the later battles especially are really just sort of statistical exercises disguised as science fiction battles. And David's a good enough writer that, we're all game designers. We've sort of toyed with the idea of maybe doing a game in that universe. And we were talking about how we would go about doing that. And David wrote this really, really great math problem and convinced us that all it was good science fiction.
Yeah.
It's a very entertaining math problem, but it's really just kind of a math problem.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it can be exciting for the people on board, right? If you've got a bunch of missiles coming at your ship, you're going to be very interested in what's happening. But, if you're playing a board game or something, it can be a little bit, if you're doing World War I combat back and forth and you're rolling a set of dice on a chart for each shell, that'll probably get tedious after about 20 or 30 minutes. So with a 6% chance to hit.
Yeah.
Get closer.
Get closer. Clearly. Yeah.
Very much so.
Clearly the right answer.
So, okay. Any final thoughts on anything that we've talked about so far? Because I think we're kind of at that point.
That's it. I think that's good. That said most of what I need.
Okay. So I tell you what, you guys keep talking. I'll go out into the other room. I'll wave, indicating that, or I'll do the live long and prosper, indicating it's time to cut out, and then I'll close the show out. So
well.
I'd like to say, for the record, before we actually went live, everything was working perfectly.
Yeah, there is that.
Did you see that? I want to get into range for grappling. That's only for Kazinti.